people through the West Central Municipal Conference. We were able to land funding from the stimulus package and got a street that was approximately $400,000 job done for $20,000 or $25,000 out of village money. I remember at the time calculating it was something like for every dollar we spent, we got 17 federal dollars to complete the project. They look for us. Our village engineer is always looking as things come available. Dave has talked to me from time to time about keeping an eye out for possibilities to get state or local money. And lately the economy, that's what led to the stimulus funds. There's not a lot there. But typically what the turnoff that I've seen is that when there could be grant money available, it typically comes with the catch that we have to come up with 20, 30, 50% to qualify. And that's the problem we have in this town. We don't have the luxury of coming up with the 20 or 30 or 50%. So we end up being non-players. We can't go for it because we can't afford that money, our part of it, to get the grant money. And because we are non-home rule, we can't figure out a way on the spot or in short notice to raise the funds to come up with it. I'll give you an example. I know a mayor that I've gotten to be good friends with since I became mayor, lives in another town, but unlike us, it's a home rule community. And when there's an opportunity to get funding from the state or federal, they look into it, but he has the luxury that we don't have. Here's how he described what they do. If they have a $1 million project that they would like to get done and they can qualify for it, but it costs the village 20%, they have to come up with $200,000. So he'll go to the bank, and again I'm paraphrasing, he'll go to the bank, borrow the $200,000 that they need to come up with their match, get the $800,000 in grant. Now they accomplished the $1 million project, and he puts a penny or 2 cent tax on cigarettes, and they raise the money to pay the loan off over a period of time. We cannot do that. That was why in 2010 I recommended that we go to home rule. In hindsight, we could have done that better. I admit that. But I think there are people who were against it then, or maybe coming around now. But that's part of the problem with grant money. We're not here. I'm not here to argue for or against home rule. We tried it the one time, and that's all. Another question? Somebody in the back.
Hi, I'm John Corcoran, 6417 Apache Drive. I feel a little bit of preaching to the choir here. I think this is predominantly a pro referendum group. But I wanted to point out 2 things. One, we may have missed it, but there was actually a moment of agreement between President Andrews and Trustee Hinshaw there earlier. I thought that should be marked for the record. But seriously, everything we've heard, the streets are bad. I've ridden my bike on your street, Mayor. I've ridden my bike in Ashbrook. They're brutal. There's no if here. It's when, and we don't have the money. I think there's general agreement on that. So we either do it this way. You might think it's fair. You might think vehicle stickers are more fair. We certainly have an enforcement question with vehicle stickers. So we have to keep that in mind as well. You mentioned home rule, and I would admit that I am anti-home rule, but I think I could be convinced if the home rule was structured in such a way that preserved the very, very critical protections for the taxpayers relative to property tax increases. I know other villages in the area have done that. It really is the best of both worlds. It'll give us an opportunity to see if there's other funding sources available, but it will not expose us to, unfortunately, things where home rule is abused and citizens are left holding the bag.
Well, Mr. Corcoran, I appreciate your comments. having proposed the home rule, I obviously advocated for it, and I quite frankly learned as I went on some of the things, although I understood it, I thought relatively a good basis in it when I started down that path. I just thought it was time for the village to move forward, having just celebrated a 50th anniversary, that, you know, we're not a teenager or a young adult community anymore. We, you know, 50 years we've been around, we've kind of matured a little bit. And being all for it, even with the, you know, with the proviso about the property taxes, I know over time and based on the input, you know, I've toned down my view of it a little bit, but that's something that could be down the line, and I'm aware other towns have put on. Like I said, it was a first attempt, and sometimes you learn by doing, and that certainly would help us, just like it does my friend who is in a home rule community, and it's beautiful. You know, when you have the authority as a board to come in, and it's handled in a proper way and not onerous to the residents, to come in and say, look folks, we need to borrow $200,000 and we'll take 3 or 4 years to pay it off, and in the meantime, we're gonna add $1 a quarter to your trash pickup, or 2 cents on a gallon of gas in town, or you know, 2 pennies on a sandwich at the local Italian beef place, or something like that, till we raise the money to pay back the $200,000. But I can immediately get the $200,000 with the loan, because I know I can raise that money by just coming to the board and trying to convince them. But
If I could just,
go ahead.
I think we also do need to be realistic, though, you know, what home rule could mean for Indian Head Park. We just don't have the volume of business. And, you know, and a couple of things that you mentioned, it's right back to the taxpayer, you know, the resident. So, you know, I think at the end of the day, it's us, and to a great extent.
Absolutely, absolutely, and that's why we want to make sure, we would want to make sure that it's handled in a proper way with protections if we were to get to that point. Anyway, if I can go back to the street bond and streets, anybody with questions about the proposal? Sir, say your name and your address, please.
Yes, James Davidson, 6440 Thunderbird Drive. If we grant, assuming that the bond does pass, there's no need to spend all that money the first year, leaving you with no available funds for grants for other street work, correct?
I think it was envisioned, and we discussed, and the trustees can jump in. We envisioned going out for the bond to get all the money, the $2.5 million, so that we can do this all streets scenario and do something on all the streets in town, for a couple of reasons. And I'm not saying your idea is a bad idea, or saying, no, we don't want to do that, but the plan that the people are being asked to vote on would authorize us to raise the $2.5 million through a bond issue, and then we would go out to the bond market and try to get the best rate and the best repayment terms that we can to minimize the impact, yet to also minimize on the residents, and to minimize the amount of interest we have to pay. And the point of doing the bigger plan is the economy of scale that we hope to get by doing a bigger project. It's just as easy for that asphalt company to come in and do as much as it can, rather than a little bit here and a little bit in another town. So we hope to save money that way, among other reasons.
That because we don't have home rule, we have no capital fund set aside that we can use to chase grants. If you delay 10% of this work for a year, you'd have $250,000 for a year to chase grants. Without home rule,
you know,
without changing the bond, and if you don't get the grants in a year, then you spend the money to finish your job.
It's a good point. That's something that I think we can look at. I don't think
common sense financial work that you do what you can to get some kind of capital reserve.
The other thing is that once we borrow the $2.5 million, we have to start paying interest on it. And so if we have it, it's costing us money just to hold it. Although, I see your point, if we could get that grant where we can get $1 million and we only have to kick in the 200,000, that extra interest money we're paying, might be wiped out by what we get from the grant.
Even
That's-
one for one.
You know what, that's a good point. I don't think we're committed, are we, council, to the referendum? That just authorizes us to raise the money, correct?
Correct. And the way the referendum is structured, it has to be spent on streets, street improvements, but how you spend the money on those street improvements would be up to the board of trustees.
Okay, so we have some leeway, and you make a very good point, Mr. Davidson, thank you. Anybody else? In the back over here?
Tim Kizabat, One Stoneheart Lane. I have a question and a comment. I think if we sit back and wait for our screwed up economy, our screwed up state or the federal government for money, I think we're making a huge mistake. I don't see any money coming from them. But my question to the engineers, have the villages around here been able to get grant money? I don't see them working on streets. Are the other communities able to get grants? Are there grants out there to be had, or has it just been pretty much been shut off? Do we expect something if we had the money, or was it just dried up?
We work in a number of communities, not specific to right here. The primary source of road funds for the area around here is the West Central Governmental. They have a budget. Unfortunately, it doesn't count for every street that you have in town. There are only certain streets. In Indian Head Park, Blackhawk was one of them. That's the one that I referred to earlier that we paved in '09. Acacia is also on what's called the federal system, federal aid system. That's the only street that's eligible for money through mayors and managers. As far as other grant work, I haven't seen any, we haven't found any to spend. We look all the time.
So our side streets that we want to fix up, no one's gonna come and rescue us on that, right?
There have been programs years ago for off-system streets, which would be your side street.
Yeah.
I haven't seen one in 25 years.
So if we got grants, we get grants for some of the major streets, but as far as all that we want to do for some of the minor streets, that's never gonna come through because okay.
Unless there was some different legislation, different packages in the bills, but right now, no.
So even if we did get money from someone, we'd make a small dent, most likely, in our overall project at best.
And you probably would do a street a little more elaborately than you would now. Like I said, Acacia is the only street in the village, aside from Wolf Road, Willow Springs Road, which don't belong to you.
So the benefit, if we did that, would be to a very small number of residents as opposed to basically everybody coming up, everybody, let's say, other than the town, other than the condos. They would not see probably that much. But everybody else, then, it's being handled, or most of the people would not see an improvement in their street if we did have.
If you did get a grant, and the way the grants are existing today, that's correct.
So if we want things fixed, we would need to pursue our program to make sure everybody gets their streets taken care of.
Correct.
Okay, thank you.
All right, we're gonna cut this off in just a minute or two. Any last question?
One comment. I've been to
Name and
several
address,
meetings.
please.
I'm sorry, Sue Kiley, 105 Edgebrook Court. We've been through this over and over and over again. What do we do if it doesn't pass? And what about funding? What about grants? What about our home values? The point is, our back is up against the wall. The election, it's Tuesday. Time for talk is over. Get out and tell your neighbors to vote for the issue. It's too late. It's too late. We've got to get out you know, knock on everybody's door around you and tell them how important it is.
Okay, thank you. I think we've covered a lot of territory, and it's gonna be up to our residents. And if you want to advocate for it, you can. If you're out there and you're against it, then obviously you have that same right to do so to your neighbors. At this time, I have one housekeeping item, and then we're gonna move to executive session. At the special board meeting last week, in connection with the appointment of John Brooks as our chief of police and village administrator, I made a reference to former President Jakey appointing a friend of his, retired chief of police of Brookfield's department, to fill an opening. Since that time, Mr. Jakey wrote to me to clarify that at the time Chief Heimel was appointed as the chief here in Indian Head Park, Mr. Heimel was not a friend of Mr. Jakey's, although they did become friends later. In any event, Chief Heimel turned out to be a very good choice, and he was good for our village. We were fortunate to have Chief Heimel as chief of police, and I believe that the same will be true of Mr. Brooks here. So at this time, I would entertain a motion to adjourn to executive session pursuant to section 2C21 of the Open Meetings Act to review closed session meeting minutes as required by section 2.06 of the Open Meetings Act.
I will make the motion to adjourn to executive session pursuant to section 2C, subsection 21 of the Open Meetings Act, to review closed session meeting minutes as required by section 2.06 of the Open Meetings Act.
Motion by trustee Walter for a second. Second by trustee Schnapper. Call the roll, please.
Trustee Walsh. Trustee Schnapper. Trustee Taylor. Trustee Inshaw.
I don't know.